Here's the controversial, counterintuitive bit. The more someone tries to force reality to behave, the more reality shows its rebellious side. Like the universe saying, "Nice plan, but you forgot the rules." In quantum mechanics, the act of measurement changes what can be seen. And in mysticism, attention changes what can be experienced. Either way, the observer can't pretend they're invisible. So this isn't about fantasy. It's about awakening to how energy, consciousness, and self-knowledge shape a person's inner peace and personal development in everyday life. Stick around, because once this spiritual portal opens, the next question becomes unavoidable. If reality is participatory, what should the soul do with that power? Topic 1. Reality isn't fixed. A wise mentor would tell the student, reality looks stable because the human brain loves shortcuts, but the universe often behaves more like a menu of possibilities than a single, frozen script. In quantum mechanics, measurement-disturbed systems, this observer effect is fundamentally about interaction with instruments, not magical wishing, even though pop culture loves to turn it into mysticism light. Ancient spirituality also talks about Maya, or illusion-like appearances, not to deny life, but to push spiritual growth. The true self is discovered when a person stops confusing surface appearances with what's deeper. He's seen it in real life. Someone thinks they are their anxiety, their job title, or their relationship drama. Yet with healing work, the identity loosens, and a calmer reality shows up. A practical example. Start a 7-day self-knowledge routine, 10 minutes to meditate, then write 1 page answering, "What story am I calling reality today?" This simple habit trains consciousness like a flashlight instead of a floodlight. That's how spiritual development becomes less talk and more transformation, an awakening that feels grounded, not floaty. Now the loop opens. Once he accepts reality is not as fixed as he assumed, the next challenge is dealing with the cost of sensitivity, because seeing more often means feeling more gao, and that's where energetic hypersensitivity and spiritual isolation can sneak in. Topic 2. The observer matters, but not like the internet says. A grounded guide would clear the fog. The observer in quantum experiments is the measuring setup, interaction that changes what can be observed. So it's not proof that human thoughts directly collapse atoms like a superhero mind beam. In the double-slit context, interference disappears when which path information gets physically recorded, and explanations emphasize decoherence, environmental entanglement, rather than someone looked at it. This is where spirituality can learn humility. Mystical language about consciousness shaping reality can be meaningful psychologically, but it shouldn't hijack physics. Still, ancient mystics weren't clueless. They were pointing at a lived principle. Attention shapes experience. If he constantly watches for betrayal, his nervous system starts measuring danger everywhere, collapsing his reality into suspicion. If he trains inner peace, his mind starts detecting opportunity, safety, and connection. Practical move. He can do a measurement diet for 1 week, reduce doom scrolling and replace it with 20 minutes of silence after waking. This simple swap often triggers a mini awakening in emotional energy. But then comes the next doorway. If the observer matters through interaction and attention, what about the weird fact that nature is stitched together? What mysticism calls oneness, and physics calls entanglement-like correlation. Topic 3. Everything is connected, carefully said. In physics, connected can mean interactions, correlations, and entanglement, and in spirituality, it can mean soul-level unity and the higher self mirrored in the universe. A careful mentor would say, don't mash these into one claim. Instead, notice the shared intuition that separateness is partly a useful convenience, not the full truth. Even the measurement problem literature highlights how difficult it is to fully remove the observer from the story of quantum experiments, which keeps the philosophical itch alive. In mysticism, this same itch becomes a calling. If everything influences everything, then every choice is a kind of prayer. That idea can supercharge personal growth. He begins treating words, habits, and relationships as energy exchanges that shape consciousness, not just random events. Practical example. He can audit entanglements, list the 5 people content sources he interacts with most, then ask which ones elevate your soul and which ones drain it. That's spirituality meeting reality with receipts. And the loop opens again. Once he senses connection, he'll crave a method to stabilize it. Otherwise, it becomes overwhelm, mystical burnout, or spiritual vision without grounding. Topic 4. The 7 symptoms of awakening. When spiritual awakening starts, it often doesn't feel like fireworks. It can feel like someone quietly changed the rules while he wasn't looking. A mentor would normalize 7 symptoms that many report during transformation: stronger intuition, emotional sensitivity, changed sleep, craving solitude, hello spiritual isolation, discomfort with old habits, deeper compassion, and a persistent sense of calling. None of this proves quantum anything. It simply describes how consciousness reorganizes when the soul is pushing towards spiritual growth. Energetic hypersensitivity can show up as irritability in crowds, fatigue after social events, or feeling too open, like the universe has no volume knob. He can respond with practical grounding: 15-minute walks without music, simple strength training 3 hours a week, and eating regular meals. Because spiritual development needs a body that can hold the energy. And yes, it's funny. Some people try to ascend while skipping breakfast, then wonder why their enlightenment feels like a headache. Next topic opens itself. Once the symptoms are recognized, the real work begins: how to turn awakening into healing rather than chaos. Topic 5. Healing over performance. A wise guide would warn, awakening isn't a badge. It's a responsibility to become more honest with the true self. Quantum talk can tempt people into spiritual bypassing. I'll just visualize abundance. But real healing usually requires meeting fear, grief, and shame without flinching. This is where inner peace becomes a practice, not a vibe. A practical path. He can use a 3-part routine: meditate 10 minutes, journal 1 trigger, what hurt, really, and take 1 small repair action: apologize, set a boundary, schedule therapy. That's spirituality with spine, and it tends to create stable personal development instead of drama-driven downloads. Over time, this becomes a spiritual portal, not escape from reality, but a deeper entry into it. And the next loop appears. After healing begins, he'll need discernment, because not every mystical idea is useful, and not every scientific idea is spiritual guidance. Topic 6. Discernment. Mysticism versus mechanics. A balanced mentor would say, physics is about models that predict measurements, while mysticism is about direct experience and meaning-making. They can rhyme without being identical twins. The observer effect is often misunderstood as mind creates matter, but mainstream explanations emphasize physical measurement interactions and decoherence, not human intention. So the intelligent move is to harvest the wisdom. Be mindful, be present, notice attention, without turning quantum words into a sales pitch. He can apply a simple test. Does this idea make me more grounded, kind, and effective? If a teaching increases paranoia, superiority, or helplessness, it's probably ego in a lab coat, whether it calls itself science or spirituality. Practical suggestion. Read 1 solid popular science explanation of measurement and decoherence, then compare it with a contemplative text. Keep what improves self-knowledge and discard what inflates fantasy. Next loop. Discernment naturally leads to integration. How to live day to day with spiritual growth without becoming weird at family lunch. Topic 7. Integration in daily life. The mentor's favorite secret: the universe doesn't reward intensity, it rewards consistency. Instead of chasing peak mysticism, he builds a quiet practice: meditate daily, sleep regularly, serve others weekly, and that steady energy produces the kind of awakening that lasts. This also prevents spiritual isolation from turning into social disconnection. Solitude becomes a tool, not a prison. A practical example: he chooses 1 soul appointment per week, volunteering, helping a neighbor, or mentoring a younger person, because spiritual growth without contribution often turns into navel-gazing. He also creates an energetic portal at home, a chair, a notebook, and 20 minutes of no phone, where he checks in with the higher self like it's a real relationship. That's how consciousness becomes lived reality, simple, repeatable, and honest. Next loop. Integration naturally sets up the final leap, transformation into purpose, where the calling becomes action. Topic 8. Purpose and calling. A wise guide would frame calling as alignment. When his habits match his values, he feels energy instead of friction. Quantum physics doesn't hand out life purpose, but it does humble the ego. Reality is subtle, and certainty has limits, so curiosity beats dogma. Mysticism adds the inner compass. The soul learns through experience, and spiritual development asks for courage, not perfection. A practical plan. He identifies one cause, one craft, and one community. Cause could be mental health, education, or family repair. Craft could be writing, teaching, or building a business. Community could be a local group, a study circle, or a service project. This turns awakening into transformation with real-world impact. And when doubt hits, it will, he returns to the basics. Meditate, tell the truth, and take the next small step. If quantum physics and ancient spirituality share any usable agreement, it's this: reality is more mysterious than the ego wants, and the universe responds to how a person participates, through attention, choices, and consistent energy. So here's the provocative question. Is he using his consciousness to elevate your soul and build inner peace? Or is he using it to rehearse the same old story in a new costume? What's one habit he'll change this week to support spiritual growth? Meditate daily, clean up relationships, or stop feeding the mind with chaos? Subscribe to the channel and enable notifications so he can keep learning how spirituality, reality, and the universe intersect, without falling for fluffy myths, and with real self-knowledge that actually works.